Now, the paper, which is an important writing material, that was China. It was invented in China, and from here it got transported to the Islamic world, and it was used for writing and translation work. And in 1896, a huge collection of medieval Jewish documents that is related to the religion of the Jews, and Jews were the mainly inhabitant of the western side of this central Islamic land, especially the areas surrounding the Israel and Palestine, was discovered in the sealed room. That room was sealed, and it was opened in 1896, and it was the Ben Ezra synagogue that was in Fustat. The synagogue is a religious place of the Jews, and the sealed room was called the Geniza. So these are about the Geniza's records and paper. That is also a source which is given in your book, and these are known by the name of Geniza records. And why they remained secure, and this is an important source of history as well, because Jews were in the habit that they did not use to destroy any piece of paper which was containing the name of God, because these letters were also containing the name of God, so they were not destroyed by the Jewish people. And now it is an important source to know the history of that period. Now, Ibn Sina, you can see from the image, this is the image of Ibn Sina, and in Europe it is known by the name of Avicenna, and he wrote a book that is known as the Al-Qanun fil Tib, or that is called the Canon of Medicine. So it is written about different diseases of that time and what is the possible cure of those diseases. It is a document which tells us in detail about the symptoms of that disease and what are the medicines which could be helpful in that disease for its cure. So that is an important document which was written by Avicenna, who was a doctor, and this book is known as the Canon of Medicine. And this book was also taught to the European people in their universities who wanted to become the doctor in the later ages. Abu Nuwas, you can see the image of Abu Nuwas, who was a Persian poet, and he wrote a number of poetries, and he questioned the cultural domination of Arabic, because Arabic used to be dominant earlier in the Islam because they belong to the areas of the Prophet Muhammad. So he questioned their authority through his poetry, and that famous poet was the Abu Nuwas, and he wrote very magnificent poetry at that time, and that is also an important part of the history. Next important poet was the Rudaki, you can see from the image, and he is considered as the father of the Persian poetry. And because Persian became a dominant language by the time of Abbasid dynasty and later on during the time of the Sultanate period, so a number of writings were written in the Persian language, and one such writer was the Rudaki. And he wrote the two kind of the poetry. One is known as the Ghazal, which is quite famous nowadays also in Urdu language, and second was the quatrain, or we can say was a kind of chopai, and in Persian language it is known by the name of rubai, that was a singular, and in plural it was called as the rubaiyat. So it used to be a 4-line stanza, and first two stanza used to set the stage, what they want to say, that used to be staged in the first two stanza, and in the third is finally poised, and the fourth used to give us the conclusion. So that was a special kind of writing, and in which Rudaki was very expert, and he started this kind of writing which later on became very, very famous, and this kind of genre was later on accepted by some other writers. So this was a great contribution which was given by the Rudaki at that time. So this kind of cultural development took place in the central Islamic land. Next is Umar Khayyam. This is another writer, and he was also a poet as well as astronomer and mathematician. So we can say that he was a versatile genius, and he wrote Rubaiyat, and it reached its zenith or its peak under the writing of the Umar Khayyam. So Umar Khayyam was a very good writer, and Rubaiyat or Rubai reached its peak under his command. And one example is given here. This is in the Persian language, and the English translation is that those whom we meet in the churches, divinity college or temples desire heaven and fear hell? So this is a question which is set by Umar Khayyam, means those people who want to go to the heaven and those who had a fear of the hell. But he who has read the secret of the divine, means the person who is having a true knowledge of the divinity, does not give a moment's thought to such matters, means to reach to the heaven and to go to the churches and to feel the divinity or to go to the temple are the trivial matter for a person who has a true knowledge of the divinity. So that kind of rubai was written by Umar Khayyam. So you can see that in the first two lines the stages were set, the questions are being asked, and third explains it in a manner, and the fourth gives us the conclusion. So that was a special kind of writing which was written by Umar Khayyam and Rudaki. Now next is Firdausi. He was also a very good writer and he belonged to the Ghazni, because under the Muhammad Ghazni, who invaded India also 17 times, he was a great fighter and he was from the Ghaznavid dynasty, who became the ruler of Ghazni after Subuktigin, after the death of his father, and he expanded his empire up to the river Indus to the western Islamic land. So a large part of the Islamic land was under his command, and at that time Ghazni became the center of literary people and literature and other cultural development, and wherever he used to invade, he used to bring the writers and other educated people to the center, that was the Ghazni. And one such writer at Ghazni was the Firdausi, and he wrote a famous book that is called Shahnama, or the Book of the Kings, and he lived in the court of the Mahmud Ghaznavi. So he wrote about the kings or the sultans of that time, and it was written by the Firdausi in Persian language. Next is Al-Biruni. Al-Biruni was also a war captive by Mahmud Ghaznavi when he invaded in the Central Asia, and he belonged to Khwarizm, and he was captured by Mahmud of Ghaznavi and he was brought to the Ghazni. Later on he developed love and an interest in Ghazni, and he stayed there till his death. Tahqiq Malil Hind, or the history of India, is also known by the name of Kitab al-Hind, which was written by Al-Biruni, which contained 80 chapters, and these 80 chapters were written on various subjects, and that was mainly written about the Indian subcontinent. So he was also a great writer of that time. So these were the important writers and educated people who contributed a lot for the spread of Islamic culture. Now what were the stories which were written at that time and which are quite popular till date? The catalogue that is called Kitab al-Fihrist. Kitab is a word which has come from Arabia, of a Baghdad bookseller that is called Ibn Nadim, describes a large number of works written in prose for moral education and amusement of the readers. So there are a number of stories which is contained in the book Kitab al-Fihrist, and mainly it contains the animal fable, and name of that animal story is Kalila wa Dimna. Here Dimna and Kalila are the two jackals, and it is story about them. Kalila wa Dimna is a story which got its inspiration and from the literature which was in Indian subcontinent, and that story is Panchtantra story. The story of Panchtantra, which is written by Vishnu Sharma in Indian subcontinent, that is also an animal fable, and from that story the inspiration was obtained by these people, and they wrote a book that is Kalila wa Dimna. Later on another book which is written in English that was also inspired from the Panchtantra, and that is Jungle Book. The most widespread and lasting literary works are the stories of hero adventures such as the Alexander, that is known by the name of Sikandar or Al-Sikandar in India and Arabian Peninsula, and Sindbad the Sailor. So these are the famous stories which are still read by the children, and there are many programs which had been broadcasted in the past on the television screen also. So the story of Sikandar and Sindbad were also quite famous and they were written at that time. The story of unhappy lover such as the Cas and which is also known by the name of Laila Majnu Ki Kahani, that is also a very famous love story which was written at that time. So we can say that there was a lot of literary work which was written in Persian as well as in Arabic language during the Central Islamic rule. So that is a great contribution to the world by these people.